welcome to the Wildline Podcast. I'm your host, Dan. This is a podcast about movies and how much money they make at the box office. Today is the weekend review show for the weekend of March 6th through March 8th, 2020. We have a few new wide releases, or technically only two, Onward and The Way Back, so we'll do deeper dives into those. Also, Emma went live, so we'll talk about that one a bit. No Chris this weekend. He's on vacation, so no timeline. I might dive into some headline stories after the top 10, and then we'll walk through what's going to happen over the next few weeks at the box office. But let's get through this top 10. Number one this weekend was the Walt Disney Pixar film Onward at $40 million. Super saturated wide release, which is what we normally see for a Pixar movie. 4,300 theaters. Per theater average was okay. $9,281 to be exact. The overall story here is like, this is an all right opening. When you look back at Pixar, it has this sort of upper tier, top shelf feeling to it as a studio, not only in terms of quality, but also in terms of performance. So Onward, I think from the start just felt a little bit off. The quality of the animation and the story that they were telling, at least in the trailer, didn't really seem up to Pixar standards, to be honest with you. And so I think that sort of thought process and that vibe of sort of this feels not quite right has carried through to the actual performance of the film here. $40 million is not great for a Pixar movie, even a kind of an off-brand one, not the mainline story like a Toy Story 4 or Incredibles. Just to sort of reflect on those, Pixar, Walt Disney had a great year last year. You had Toy Story 4 open at 120, close that at 434 domestic, over $1 billion worldwide for Toy Story 4. You had Incredibles 2 in 2018 that opened at 182, did 608 domestic, closed that at 1.2 billion worldwide, not adjusted for inflation, but it's not that much, it's 2 years. Then in 2017, you had Coco that opened at 50. So Onward's already 10 million below that. Coco had a great multiplier, 4x, closed it at 209 domestic, $800 million worldwide for Coco. Cars 3, I remember that kind of being underwhelming doing that episode of the podcast. Opened at 53, closed up at 152. Couldn't even hit a 3x multiple. That's really bad for a film like that. 383 worldwide. Not a great performance for that movie. We'd have to go back to The Good Dinosaur back in November 2015, before I was even doing this podcast, a good, 4.5 years ago. Good Dinosaur opened up at 39, closed out at 123. So had a 3x multiple on that, typical for a children's film like this, and did 333 worldwide. Because of the coronavirus and how it's basically spreading throughout the world, a country like Italy and France, very affected. A country like Germany, not so much right now. UK, not so much. So it's hard to really tell what sort of impact Corona is having on the box office in general. In the United States, as Deadline notes, we're up about 4% from last year. So it doesn't seem like Corona is really having an effect yet. We're only at just about 500 known cases in the United States. So I think this weekend's probably not affected. I do think it's going to start to affect it next weekend when schools and cities start to sort of go in shutdown mode to sort of get this virus out of the way and hope it passes. So Onward, not a good performance, but kind of expected that it wasn't going to be great. I don't think anybody thought, I think the consensus was an overperformance maybe in the 50s, maybe 60s. I had no read on it whatsoever, to be honest with you. I was just very confused. I think the thing that confused me the most about it is that you saw the trailer and I immediately thought of another studio doing animation, like a DreamWorks or maybe like a Sony thing, maybe even Lionsgate. Do they do animation? I think they do. It just did not feel at all like, if you think like Pixar is like the BMW of children's animation films, that trailer and Onward kind of seemed maybe like a Toyota, maybe even more like a Kia or something. Not a bad car or anything like that, but not a BMW or not a Mercedes-Benz, like not the top shelf situation. And I think that vibe was just there the entire time. And I think, people did not get excited about it. Let's dive into sort of the numbers and what actually happened here. In terms of like the critical response, 86% on Rotten Tomatoes. So it's a good movie, 71 actual score. Top critics was 71%, lower there, 65 actual score. That's usually what we see, right? In general, with Rotten Tomatoes, top critics overall, all critics is a little bit higher. Top critics tend to be a little bit more discerning and critical. And that sort of follow the pattern here. Verified audience score, though. So $40 million, let's say 4 million people saw it or something like that in the US and Canada. That's kind of what it would be like. $10 tickets essentially is the average these days. 96% verified audience score from that group. 93 actual score. Very, very high. All audience score 94%, 91, pretty similar. Cinema score of A-. Deadline called this out as a bad thing because I think the last Pixar movie that got A- was, I want to say, Cars 2. I don't buy that. I love Cinema Score. I think it's amazing. I don't get the variances of the minuses versus an A. It's not that big of a deal. Like an A+ is, very special. But an A- is an interesting data point. But then post-track's 90%. And then you compare post-track with verified audience score, which is 96%. Yeah, people love this movie. Like, that's essentially what you're looking for. Is that essentially, is the response good enough where the legs are going to kick in? I think here, yeah. I think you're looking at $40 million. I think baseline, 120 would be a good domestic run for this, and then probably worldwide in the low 300s, mid 300s, something like that. Is that going to happen? I don't know. Coronavirus is sort of this weird thing that it's hard to tell what's going to happen, because in the United States, we could be at 1,000 cases by Wednesday, and that changes the ballgame. I tell you, I'm here in St. Louis, and we didn't have a case until last night. I guarantee you when I go to the store today, it's going to be absolute chaos. So, and people are going to stop doing stuff socially. So we don't really know how it's going to play out. But if you go by historical sort of records with a film like this, you're expecting a 3x multiple for 120 domestic. In terms of definite recommend was 53%, which is okay. Letterboxd score of a 76 from Film Snobs. Toy Story is also a 76, which is interesting. So I think I think it's a branding issue here and a marketing issue. I think the film itself is great. And that makes sense because Pixar usually does not put out subpar quality material at all. Frozen 2 is at a 68. This is higher. How to Train Your Dragon Hidden Worlds at a 74. This is a little bit higher than that with the Letterboxd rating. So, that very sort of critical audience actually likes this film a lot. 58% families with the audience here, 42% general audience, 52% female, 48% males, over index on the female there, 51% under 25, and then 35% of the audience was actually under 12 children. I don't know. What can you say about this one? No one expected this to do all that well. It's kind of a bizarre release, I think, overall. We don't see often that there's more, it depends on the year. We haven't had two Pixar movies come out in the same year, except in 2017. This year we have one in March and one in June. Those are pretty tight together. Soul's coming out June 19th. And I think that's where a lot of the attention is going to be in terms of these Pixar movies here. Like, Onward seemed like a side story or a side sort of journey. It did not seem like a mainline Pixar movie. Like, Soul definitely has that polish to it. And it has that, like, it's almost like a luxury branding thing going on. Like I was talking about the BMW thing before. It feels that way. Like Soul with the trailer, or not the trailer, it's the posters and stuff like that. It just has that, this is a Pixar movie. And Onward never felt like that. And I think that's one of the reasons why it's underperforming a bit here. Okay, so that's enough about Onward. Number 2 is Invisible Man, which I did see this week, which was awesome. Surprise! Like, I had heard all good things about it, but and I was kind of like midway through, it was like, I don't know, is this really as good as people say? The back half is just a fantastic horror thriller. I mean, it really, they just it's almost like they got down to the bottom of the knife, 2 outs is like, I don't know about this, and then grand slam. It's like, boom, the ending's so good. So it's doing quite well, especially for a horror film in its second weekend. 15.5 million, a 46% drop, 3,600 theaters still. Per theater average this weekend was just about $4,200 per theater. Sits at $56 million now domestically in the US and Canada, $72 million worldwide for a movie that costs $7 million of a production budget. That's amazing. And you kind of have to wonder how they do that. I'm sure people have done podcasts or YouTube videos about the Blumhouse model. But for $7 million, you got to expect that Elizabeth Moss is getting back-end deals, right? Like, she's going to get a cut of the revenue here, not even the profit, but she's getting cut of the revenue. Marketing had to be pretty high, probably $70 million worldwide. So the true cost of the film is much higher than 7 million, but like this thing is going to make quite a lot of money for Blumhouse and Universal. And it sounds like they're going to sort of greenlight another, this, because this is part of the dark verse thing that Universal was trying to do with The Mummy in 2017. So, that was like a tentpole 90s formulaic blockbuster that failed miserably and probably lost them like over $100 million. This is the exact opposite. It's the Blumhouse model. Let's do bottom up, super low budget, get a star to get some back end deals going on so we can shoot this thing for really low. And then it worked, and it worked really well. And I think that model is probably how they're going to keep producing these new monster movies at Universal. And we'll get to that later when I do some news stories. Okay, so great performance for Invisible Man. Let's talk about a new wide opener. The Way Back was in number 3, 8.5 million, in a smaller number of theaters. I also saw this this weekend. I actually saw it yesterday. 2,700 theaters. Per theater average, not good. $3,127. This one, the expectations I felt were, I think me and Chris both felt like this thing was going to break out. And for some reason, it just has not connected with people at all. And I don't really get why, because Ben Affleck has done a full court press on Doing Press. He had that sort of bigger, almost profile-like thing in the New York Times. Obviously, he's going through some troubles here with alcoholism. That's what the story's all about as well. And like, I thought it was interesting, and this may be why it's not performing quite well, is that, so this is, if you go to AMC, I'm on AMC, whatever it is, A-list stub, so I can see 3 movies a week for like $20. It's amazing. I just started a couple weeks ago and it's like life-changing. But in any event, like, they make this distinction on AMC versus like, it's called artisan films. And it's for art house films that they play at like normal movie theaters. It's not that big of a deal, but I kind of like it because it gives them initiative to play something like A Portrait of Lady on Fire at like a mall theater, which is like, seeing that movie in a mall theater would be surreal. I've not done that yet. But it's interesting that they gave that stamp, the artisan film stamp, to this movie, because on the surface of it, it seems more like a middle of the road sports drama. That just happens to have Ben Affleck as an alcoholic as he's actually going through alcoholism in his real life. Obviously, so it's kind of like a little bit weird, but like, why would you brand it as an art film? Now, the film itself could go either way. I mean, you could see it as an art film, and it kind of works as an art film, but it's a little bit too hammy, I think, to be a real kind of landmark theaters art house film. It doesn't really go all the way with it. This is actually a type of art film that you would have seen, I would say, in like 2004, 2005, at like, thinking in Milwaukee, the Oriental. There's like The Kids Are All Right. It's like a movie that has the polish of a mainline major studio film, but then has sort of heightened artistic elements to it, but doesn't go all in. It's not Antichrist. It's not Mother. It's not, something like really out there. It's more like a Green Book type thing, where they're trying to play something down the middle. And I think The Way Back kind of got stuck in that no man's land. I wanted it to be maybe a little bit darker and a little bit less hammy. I think they could have gone there, but they just didn't. And a lot of the elements of the script were very rote and very much recovery drama. And it's got, all the alcoholism sort of things. They go a little bit way too far. I thought the depiction of alcoholism felt a little bit sort of too on the nose. Like, there's a scene where he just sits there and basically for 5 minutes, like, constantly drinks beer. Like, that's not really, I think, how a lot of alcoholics function. But they had to do it for the screen and for, I guess, for the story effect, to pull people in and say, yeah, hey, everybody, this guy really is an alcoholic. Look at all the beer he's drinking. And so I think it was kind of stuck in no man's land. That doesn't necessarily talk to why it's not doing so well. I thought that this thing was going to break out. I think the studio thought maybe 10 low teens on this. I'm trying to look back at like the forecast from Box Office Pro and kind of see what they were saying. But it's definitely not performing all that well. And they were saying they're right on the money, $8 million. That's pretty good. And they dropped theirs. Me and Chris were way wrong on this. I think we're wrong because it's just there wasn't an audience for a dramatic basketball alcoholism film. There just wasn't. Like, this is more, to me, I get releasing the basketball movie during March Madness and all that stuff that's going on with college basketball, but this honestly seemed much more like an October, November awards film. I would probably even push it out in September when things are quiet and actually basketball season starting up again, or right before that. That to me would have been a better play here. I just don't think people are in the mood to watch this type of movie right now, which is unfortunate because I thought it was actually very good. And critics kind of agree with me here. 88% Rotten Tomatoes, 85% from top critics. Verified audience is also an 85%. Cinema score is a B+, post-track 70%. Definite recommend at 53%, which is the same as Onward. Letterboxd is 72, which is good. I kind of compared it to Live by Night, Ben Affleck's last movie, 54, that one got. Also, Glory Road is kind of like a 2006 basketball film. Kind of felt similar vein. That got a 62. So it's, critics like it. Audiences who have seen it like me like it. I would have given it like a 73 out of 100. And so it's just, if you have to pinpoint it, I think it's the release date didn't feel right. And I think the marketing, I don't know if I'd even blame the marketing. The marketing seemed pretty on point to me. And I think reflected the accuracy, or reflected accurately what the film was really about. It's less about basketball and it's more about alcoholism, but it's even more about grief and how someone deals with loss than anything. And that's why it seemed a little bit more geared towards an art house fall release, because the sports stuff is definitely like third layer in that narrative priority. And so I don't know. It's not a great performance. I don't think Warner Brothers is going to be very happy about it. I don't think Ben Affleck's going to be very happy about it. I think he'll have a great multiple because I think word of mouth will be pretty good. 8.5 now, easily $25 million domestically. I think it pushes 30 pretty easily. I don't know if there's international audience for this. Is there? I don't know. I don't know how big a movie like this would be in, like, say, I don't know, Mexico or Brazil or any country that's not decimated by coronavirus right now. So I don't think there's a huge international play here. So kind of not, what was the PAN on this? I got to look that up. It looks like it was like 20 something, $23 million. Sorry, for the production budget was $23 million. PAN, I have no idea, but I guess this would be pretty high, at least domestically. If I had to guess, I don't know. Maybe they spent like $30 million to market this thing. So I don't think it's going to make money, unfortunately. I do see it have a good second life on VOD and EST digital release, and then an even stronger life, I think, on streaming. I do think when people see this movie, they're going to like it a lot, and I think it tells a very interesting story. It's just not really a story about basketball, though. And I think they played that up and all this stuff. It's not about basketball. It's about alcoholism and loss. That's essentially what it is. Okay, cool. Obviously older people showed up for it. Let's do that really quick. 40% was over 50 years old. That was from Cinema Score via Deadline. That's really high on that. 64% was over 35. If the normal breakdown of a movie is about 66% over 25, this clearly skewed old. 65% white, 11% Latino. Way down on Latinos there, which is interesting because it takes place in San Pedro, Los Angeles. So you would think maybe that would have something to do. Though in the trailer, they don't really show that up at all. It could have played. The book took place in Philly, I think. It does kind of seem like a northeastern story transplanted to Los Angeles. I don't know how to explain that, but it just felt that way. 10% African American, 14% Asian other. Okay, cool. So that one's underperformance, no doubt. Maybe would you call it a flop? Not really. If it made like $1,500 per theater, I would call it a flop, but it wasn't a huge bet. Warner Brothers hopefully might be able to make up money on the digital and streaming deals, but at best it would be break even for a movie like that. Okay, number 4, Sonic the Hedgehog did $8 million essentially, 51% drop. It's at 140 now here domestically. Great run for that movie, especially with its troubled start. $278 million worldwide. Solid run. Obviously, the expectation there was that thing was going to flop, and it's not. I don't know how much money they've poured into the whole thing when you get to the reshoots and the redoing the CGI. So financially, I can't really pinpoint it right now, but I think it's ultimately Paramount's breathing a huge sigh of relief that this thing didn't crash and burn, and it's actually doing pretty well. So I think overall the story there is positive. Number 5 was Call of the Wild, $7 million, 48% drop. Sitting at $57 million. This thing is legging out pretty good right now. $91 million worldwide. Who said what? It's going to lose money? Yeah, because the thing is, it's legging out well, but the production budget was way too high, obviously. And the print and advertising was probably way too high. The whole entire concept, as we've said multiple times in this podcast, just didn't really add up and make sense. Pouring that much money into a film with a dog when most people are used to seeing dogs on film as actual dogs and not CGI. And then I think Chris Stuckman, on YouTube, like just threw out that like there's this Disney movie with Willem Dafoe on Disney Plus that's about the same thing essentially with real dogs, which probably would cost like $10 million to make. So it doesn't really add up why they chose this path. And then kind of hurting for it, despite the fact that it's doing okay. The production budget and costs were way too high to really offset. So not a winner there for Call of the Wild. Number 6, we can go deeper dive on this one a little bit. Emma from Focus Features. This is a wide expansion. It's been out for 3 weekends so far. It added up just about 1,500 theaters this weekend. Per theater average was not great. $3,195, basically $3,200 per theater. Total take so far here domestically is $6.8 million. Worldwide, it's at 18.2, which is not super bad. Look, if you look at the numbers on this, Rotten Tomatoes 85% from critics, 95% from top critics. You don't see that very often. You don't see the top critics being higher than all critics. That means with these sort of the bigger folks, the more I call them a little more arty folks, they like it. They like this movie. Verified audience is 73%. Yikes, that's bad. Anything in the low 80s, once you get in the 70s, verified audience, and the cinema score of a B matches that pretty 1-to-1. Post track of a 60%. So you have 3 separate data points there that indicate that the people who went out to go see this did not like it very much. My guess is it's probably like a little bit too experimental for people expecting, a Jane Austen adaptation. Definite recommend was low at 44% as well. Letterboxd is kind of, film snob people, so it's kind of 72. The 1996 Emma got a 64 on there. Downton Abbey got a 70. Little Women has an 86. I think that might be the highest score I've ever seen officially on Letterboxd is Little Women, if that tells you anything about the audience on that platform. So this one's an okay performance. I think there was some thought, I think Chris was thinking about this, that maybe it breaks out a bit. I don't get the 1,500 theater ad here. It kind of seems like maybe they just want to clean up and get as much money as they can, then sort of get out. Because it won't be in theaters more than a couple of weeks with a $3,200 per theater average on its first wide release opening. And plus a lot of stuff's coming out. So yeah, it's not a great performance. I'm not really sure what they thought was going to happen with it. I think if you expected this thing to make more than $15 million domestically, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And it's not going to come even close to that. I don't think it doesn't look like. So not sure what the strategy was there. It's hard to really sell, the costume, old clothes movie stuff unless you have Greta Gerwig and the film Twitter favorites cast. That to do it, or The Favorite, where it's an amazing filmmaker with these A-listers in the moment actors. You don't really have that with Emma. You don't really have any of that buzz and hype behind it. And also you're kind of dumping it in this is not even the Easter slot, because Easter's over a month away and something, isn't it? So I guess it's the spring break slot for colleges. I don't know. March used to be, always kind of felt like it's becoming a blockbuster month, but so far this month it has not really played out that well at all. And I kind of mentioned that when we talked about March. It seems like a really bizarre month. And with the coronavirus especially, it's playing out that way. So Emma, not a great performance on wide expansion. Bad Boys for Life in number 7, $3 million, 30% drop. Continually having these low drops. Lost 500 theaters. Still doing $1,400 per theater in its 8th weekend. $202 million domestically. Worldwide, you're sitting at 409. I mean, that is a best case beyond imagination performance for that movie, which I felt like a lot of people felt like was just not really going to take off in January. But that movie has proved us all totally wrong, and the nostalgia for the 90s is back with a vengeance. And I think just a wonderful performance in that movie. Number 8, Birds of Prey, 2.1 million, 47% drop. Okay, $82 million domestically, per theater average under $1,000. So it's definitely on its last leg. $191 million worldwide. Pretty, the more I look at those numbers each week, the more it just seems like a terrible performance. I think the budget was pretty high on this. It wasn't meant to be an Avengers or, necessarily, or a Wonder Woman. I think they maybe hoped that would be like a Wonder Woman. But like not even breaking $100 million here domestically, that's pretty piss poor. And we talked at length why that is. The branding, the marketing, the timing of release, a lot of sort of thing. I think ultimately, to me, like as we get more data here and some distance from its release, it's in its 5th weekend now. To me, it just feels like it wasn't the right character, and that's like Margot Robbie crushes in that movie. She is fantastic in that role. I mean, she really is a joy to watch on screen. Playing Harley Quinn, she fits it so perfectly. It's just people weren't asking for that movie is what it comes down to, and I hate that phrase to people who ask for this, but there is a sort of truth to that. Like, when you're conceiving of a film like this, is there, let's say you want to make $200 million, right? You can average it out. Or do 20 million people in the United States and Canada want to go out and see this? That's really what you have to ask yourself. Are 20 million people going to get in their car and go out and watch this in the theater? And I think of Birds of Prey, they made the wrong choice there. I think that was never probably going to happen. Even if you marketed it 1,000 different ways, you couldn't ask for a better lead than Margot Robbie there. So who knows? But not a good performance. Definitely a flop for Warner Brothers on that one. 2 flops in the top 10 for them. Well, I guess like the way back, I'm not going to count a flop, right? It's too small of a movie. Let's see. Number 9 was My Hero Academia. Doing 1.5 million, 1,200 per theater, 74% drop, like we had thought about last week. Definitely sort of a tight-knit group of fans that really wanted to see that on the big screen, went to go see it opening weekend, and the gas is run out. There's nobody else besides people who are in the know that want to go see that and know all about it, and they've seen it. Now it's dropping 74%, and now it will disappear from basically every multiplex by next weekend is what's going to happen. But hey, Funimation's probably happy with this, and Sony, $12.6 million domestically here. I wonder what the international number is for that. Let me check that out real quick. $29 million internationally. I don't know how much things like that cost, but I think for what it is in the context, it seems like a pretty good performance to me. 10 and I love this. In the 10th spot, we had a photo finish. Somehow 1917 keeps Jumanji the Next Level out of the top 10 for like the 13th week. They're calling 1917 at 1.37 million, Jumanji at 1.34 million. Keep in mind the per theater average much higher on Jumanji, $955 to $893 in 1917. Jumanji, of course, we've talked about a million times. Really, like, it's funny that Sony has this formula almost with Jumanji and Bad Boys for Life, where they just get the long players. I don't know what it is, what the formula is. There's something about those two movies that gets people to come out over and over and over again and to pay. Jumanji Next Level is at $315 domestically. Internationally, it's kind of be insane. $791 million internationally. I mean, that is a smash hit for Sony Pictures, and the second one in that series. They got that down. What they really need to do, I think I said this before, they just need to replicate that sort of concept and model to things that are not Jumanji, and they could really be an ascendant film studio after having a couple troubled few years here. Okay, cool. What else? Anything in limited to talk about? Not all that much, really. Portrait of a Lady on Fire, I have to talk about every week. Added 66 theaters. We're at 3.3 million. Hey, that's better than I could even imagine for that. Parasite's still out. Parasite's been out on digital for 2 months, and it's still playing in 625 theaters, doing $1,000 per theater. 52.8 million, the best film ever for Neon. Anything else limited that I can look at? Jojo Rabbit's still in theaters. What's going on? Extraordinary, open to 32 theaters. It's a non-starter. $2,600 per theater. Swallow. Let's take a look at that. Oh man, this blows. So Swallow is it's an art body horror film from IFC Films. Haley Bennett is in the lead. I don't know. She's been in like a lot of stuff. She's kind of one of those like, very beautiful young women who shows up in a movie and you're like, oh, like she's a good actor. Like, why don't I see her more? And like, she was in Music and Lyrics. She plays like the Shakira Britney Spears character in that one. And then she was in Girl on a Train, where she plays like Justin Theroux's wife at the time. I don't know. I can't remember that story. And I just saw it like 2 months ago. So she's like, I always have really liked her, as an actor. I think she has a lot of, skill and chops, and she just never really seems to get like the parts. Obviously for a lot of reasons within the industry and sort of sexism and that sort of stuff and patriarchy. But this looked like a perfect film for her. Swallow. I think that the premise is essentially she has some sort of mental illness or anxiety problem, and the only way she can get rid of it is by swallowing random things. It sounds absurd, but go out. If you're a horror movie fan, it's definitely not for everybody. But if you're a horror movie fan, do go out and see the trailer to this, because it's one of my favorite trailers of the year. And I was like, this is what I want. These are the type of horror films that I want. Like, that's kind of a almost throwback to Cronenberg in the 70s or something, like super gnarly body horror stuff. And it looks fantastic. It is DOA. It opened 3 theaters. I'm assuming probably all in New York or something on IFC Films. I'm assuming the IFC Film Center in West Village. It's playing $4,700 per theater on 3 theaters. So this would have been like me showing up with like 20 other people to see this. I don't think it's going to be playing in St. Louis anytime soon, but not a good performance for Swallow. Okay, that's it for the top 10. Because we're not doing Time Machine, because Chris is out, we can just talk about a couple of kind of headlines that are happening in the world. So let's talk about one. Quiet Place 2. Social media stuff is coming out on that. The trailers have been, at first I saw that trailer and I was like, oh, that looks pretty good. But I don't know. And I didn't really like the first one. I just did a rewatch of the first one. I was like, oh, this does not hold up that well at all. But the second one looks really good. Social media responses right now on Quiet Place Part 2 are fantastic. Some early reviews are really sort of gushing to some degree. So I think the stock on that movie has gone way up, and it doesn't open up for 12 days. I think that thing's going to be, and we'll talk about that in a bit when we talk about what's going to happen the next few weeks. But I think it's going to do quite well. Some of the bigger news this weekend, or this week in general, is the coronavirus having an effect on the industry, and a pretty big effect. One, I think the biggest news and sort of what signaled the change that was going to come here was Bond moving from April release to November. And Hollywood Reporter has a story about how they're going to lose about $30 to $50 million to do that move. I think, with the coronavirus and what's happening, if you don't realize this, but China has shut down their theaters for the last 2 months. So no one's seen a movie in a movie theater in the biggest market, or one of the biggest markets, probably the biggest market in the world, in China for 2 months. So I think that's going to continue to happen. It might even happen here in the States. And then my A-list fucking AMC thing will be worth nothing. Yeah, it's having a big effect. Smaller stuff too. Like the, what the hell is that movie? My Spy, that got pushed. That movie's been pushed like 12 times, but they're pushing it again because of the virus. That seems almost like kind of like an excuse. They're pushing it back to mid-April. That doesn't make any sense because the coronavirus is going to be raging in the United States by then. But they pushed it back a month. I don't. Maybe it's not to do with the virus, but whatever. And then probably the biggest news, virus related, is South by Southwest, which is a massive. It started out as kind of just like a groovy semi-trade show thing for music and film back in the day. I think it's been going on for over 30 years. But now it is like this mecca, almost like a second Comic-Con for like music, film, video games, tech. It really is a big show. And they shut it down. Austin shut it down and said, we're not doing it this year after 34 years. And that's like $400 million in economic boon to Austin. So they're not taking the coronavirus thing very lightly at all. So that is a big thing. What do I think the effect is going to be here overall? It could be pretty massive. It really depends on how bad it gets in the US. And right now, based on what I'm seeing, the response has not been great by the government. It doesn't really seem like they know what they're doing. Like they're not testing people, which is like the worst thing you could do at this stage of the virus. You need to be testing everybody for free. Anybody who has symptoms, test them, because then they'll quarantine themselves and you stop the spread. This is a disease that, is not necessarily like airborne, but it's one of those things where if you're out and about, and you wash your hands a lot and don't touch, stuff like that, you probably be okay. The problem is that when someone's not okay, then they infect their entire family. That's what's really happening. You get like one cluster and then they affect their entire family. And then, it's just people not being careful, and then it's spreading to their immediate family they live with. And so if people isolate themselves, but that means not going to the movies, right? Maybe. It means not going to school. It means not going to work. People have less money. Those will have a sort of a domino effect situation happening in the United States. But on the other hand, it could be contained if people are smart and self-isolate and that sort of stuff, and get the help they need from the doctors. So I'm not really sure how it's going to play out. We'll know a lot more by like midweek and the next weekend and see if it's really going to affect the box office. And then the one thing I wanted to follow up lastly before I talk about what's going to happen over the next few weeks, it looks like the Dark Universe is back on. The Mummy was a total mess, but now with the win of the Invisible Man, the Universal's thinking, let's kind of do this. It looks like James Wan has been tapped by Universal Studios to do another original monster movie. And I don't know, does it say, no details yet on what the project will be, but the fact that they have James Wan, who is kind of, I don't know, I've always tangentially related him to Blumhouse. He's not technically, but like he is the guy, who kind of got this The Conjuring, Saw he was involved with. So the Conjuring universe, he essentially launched that. I believe he also did the Insidious films. And so, it's one of those things where he has a huge stamp on horror of the last decade. He's one of the guys who really brought it back, along with Jason Blum. And so I think he's kind of a legend. To me, he is. In production and directing of horror films. He's also done obviously like Aquaman, which is a huge blockbuster, and that Furious movie. What did he do? Like Furious 7 or something. So that's a big deal that Universal got him to do a Dark Universe film. I wonder what it's going to be. Is it going to be Dracula? Feels like it's played out, right? Like the BBC series, which I didn't really like that much, but it was kind of fun. I don't think it's going to Dracula. Frankenstein could be interesting, because you haven't had a really good Frankenstein movie in a long time. Wolfman, no, pass. Mummy, pass. Creature from the Black Lagoon, maybe. I might bet right now is on Frankenstein, because I think that would be so dope if you did that. Anyway, some just some news stories to talk about what's going on at the box office and what's going on in the movie theater industry in general. Let's talk about what's going to happen in the next few months to close out the show. Let's see what is happening next week. Bloodshot comes out. Looking at like 10.5 million. That seems way too low. Like it just, domestic forecast is this is Box Office Pro, by the way. They dropped their numbers 5% from last week on the forecast here. That just seems not even, I don't know, it doesn't even seem like in the ballpark to me. This thing, I feel like Bloodshot, it can open to like $23 million. I think it can open up what they have for the domestic total, but it might be totally crazy. I just think that Vin Diesel is one of the most bankable stars out there, and it looks like a kind of interesting action-y movie. So I don't know. I think there's an audience built in for that, and I think they're going to show up. Also coming out is The Hunt next weekend. This is the banned movie. After why was this banned again? Was there one of the thousands of mass shootings that happened in the United States? I don't know. Was there a political one? I can't even remember. But 9.5 million is what the current estimate is for opening weekend. That seems high. I saw the trailer a couple times. I think once in front of Invisible Man, once in front of The Way Back. Reaction was not good from the audience. The trailer seemed way too truncated. Also didn't make any sense. Like the trailer is them talking about what they're doing and then pretending like they're not. It's like very confusing. And this is somebody who knows all about the movie. So I can't imagine what a general audience member thinks about when they see that trailer. I think 9.5 is too high. I think you're looking lower at like 6 or 7. I think it's going to flop ish. Didn't get shot for a lot of money, but I don't think it's going to do very well. I think Bloodshot's going to crush it. Also, I still believe, look out for this one. I feel like this is, I just got to remind myself on what movie. I think this is the religious singer movie. It's based on the trailer. I don't know. I have a soft spot for these types. Yeah, it is. I have a soft spot for these types of movies. I think it's a true story of a Christian music artist who goes through some tragedy. It's about that. It's about his relationship with Christ. I'm not even religious, but like I love these movies because they're just like a rom-com genre formula. It's like, what's the ending of any of these movies? Oh, Christ saves. Like that's the entire thing. It's always the same punchline, which I love. So I still believe they're saying $13 million for the opening weekend, $43 million. That's a pretty strong performance that they're projecting, and I would agree with that. I'd say like maybe a little bit higher, like $15 million. Remember we had I Can Only Imagine a couple years back, which nobody saw coming and did really well as a Christian movie. I think this is going to be very similar. I think their upper range of domestic projections at 59 million. I think it pushes that. I think it opens up maybe like 15 to 20 and then kicks it over to like $60 million. I think that's definitely possible. My Spy obviously kicked back or pushed out now to April 17th. Let's talk about Quiet Place 2 and Mulan to sort of close out the show here. Quiet Place 2, they dropped their projection from last week, and I think that's a mistake. They're saying $65 million opening weekend. That's already pretty high, and they say it closes out at 152. If I'm looking, it really is going to depend on the coronavirus. If we have like 2,000 cases in the United States and people are freaking, they're not going to go out and see this, especially with a crowded theater. But I don't know. My gut here says 65 sounds about right, but I think it's going to have a good multiple just because of word of mouth. I think it pushes it. I'm going to say this. I'm going to say probably like around 70 to 75, and then easily cruises into $200 million domestically. So I'm about $50 million higher on my forecast than Box Office Pro is in terms of the final domestic. It just, the timing seems right. The quality seems like it's there. Do people want to go out and see a movie about an apocalypse? Because that does take place, I think, during the beginning of like the alien invasion. So you get to see a lot of the before the last movie, which looks really fascinating. Cillian Murphy's in it. Yeah, I think it's going to do quite well. I think $200 million is almost feels like a lock here for Quiet Place 2. And then Mulan, speaking of the coronavirus, what are they doing with this one? This one's tough. They have this like way up at $65 million. This is opening on the 27th. 65 million, closing out 185. Who knows what's going to do worldwide? Probably a lot. I think it's going to be a tough sell for a lot of people. I think it's going to be muted more around 50, close out at 150 would be my guess. It just doesn't feel like the right time for that film to come out. It almost feels like the exact wrong release date. With everything that's happening, that's funny. Like I would have pushed Mulan to the fall. I wouldn't have pushed James Bond. Like it just doesn't, like pushing James Bond doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. Maybe I think like Italy and France are going to be massive for that movie. They probably will be. But like, is Corona really going to be gone by November? I don't think so. So, don't get that move. Mulan though is just like, the outbreak started in China. This is a movie about Chinese heritage and stuff. Like it just feels not the right time for this movie to get released. I think they could have definitely shifted it a bit. Maybe not summer, maybe like late summer, August would have been a little bit better for this, but I don't think it's going to do all that well. Okay, that's all I got for you folks. Thanks for listening. Chris will be back next week and we'll do timeline and all the fun stuff with him. This has been the Wildline Podcast.